Is there any degree of fear that you're picking up in the White House that the facts are going to supersede the plot line the president is giving the American people? Is there any degree of surprise that with all this guy has survived and put behind him to wake up every day, this is sitting in the middle of the road in front of him?
Well, there's certainly already a lot of internal infighting and finger pointing and recriminations. And one of the things that's notable is that, as you said, all this president has faced, a lot of those are crises of his own making. And this is a little bit of self-sabotage. And this is the rare crises from outside, from abroad. And there is a sense, not necessarily in the White House, but certainly administration-wide, that there was a period of several weeks from when we found out that there was this virus known as coronavirus in the Wuhan province of China, to when the president finally appointed, Vice President Pence to head this task force, that time was just squandered. And you can go through it and pinpoint discrete instances of when the testing didn't work, when the testing criteria was too narrow. And there's also talk of how the White House, especially the president, didn't really take it seriously when it was a public health crisis. It took for it to become a political crisis. So that would be the stock market plummeting. That would be what the president viewed as alarmist rhetoric from his aides, saying it's not a question of if, but when, that the president and the White House really got engaged, which frankly just started about a week ago yesterday. Jonathan
Lemire, let's keep going on this theme. The president worked the word flu into the Fox News interview last night. He has always been able to create this alternate universe, in some cases using his own stats and his own facts. But to Ashley's point, this bumps against public health, which all of us have a stake in.
Sure. His entire life as a celebrity real estate developer, when he was calling in completely made-up stories to the tabloids, to his time as a politician and then president, he tries to assert his own reality, and he often uses his own set of facts trying to create that reality, which is obviously sometimes flies in the face of what the rest of us are experiencing every day. And certainly this is one where, by sheer force of personality, he has often gotten away with it. But this is a moment where, as you say, it may be harder. We're seeing it already now. He's downplaying the crisis. OK, that's standard for a politician. But he's doing so in a case where he's misstating the numbers here. He's been consistently saying there are far fewer people affected by this than actually are. He has 3 times in the last few days been publicly corrected by his advisors when he suggested that a vaccine might be on the market for Americans to use within a matter of months. And he had to be told, like, no, it's going to be a year or more, most likely. He is, to Ashley's point, he was slow to react, in part because he didn't want to publicly talk about it, because he didn't want to upset the markets or upset Xi Jinping in China, and criticize their handling of this virus here, because President Xi is someone he's worked as an ally. They're still working on a trade deal together. He didn't want to be seen as embarrassing him. But this is a moment where his supporters, even those who perhaps get their news from Fox News and other cable networks, who are inclined to believe the president over the more quote mainstream media, who are inclined to take his word for it, even when he's contradicted by most other sources. If people around them are getting sick, if in their local newspaper there's stories about people getting sick, if their local school district has to close, that's going to be very different. And they're going to be impacted by this. They're going to see the markets perhaps continue to plummet. And this will be a moment where the president's ability to create his own reality may really be tested.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.